This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Our goal with our videos is to empower you to be able to do the repairs on your own and save a whole lot of money and also get that great feeling of having fixed it by yourself.
Today we have an LG washing machine that has the common LE error, which means a locked rotor, and usually means that something's going on with the motor. And in this case, what we had when we tried to do a spin is we have this kind of small motion of the spin basket, a little bit of weird noise, and then it tries to spin again, but really nothing going on, never really going to spin, and also it won't go to agitate. So there's a couple things that could cause this. One of them is this kind of cheap thing called the Hall sensor, which is only about $11 on Amazon. And some models you can just replace this little thing, which is really easy to do. Sometimes you have to replace the stator assembly, which comes with a new Hall sensor. They don't sell the Hall sensor by itself. Usually, though, you can just get a new sensor and put it on. Today, we're going to go over how to replace the sensor and the stator. So we're going to be, in this case, we have to remove this door to get this thing out. And we're going to remove, or behind it, we're going to remove this back panel. We're going to take 4 Phillips head screws out to get the back panel off. So we just need a Phillips head screwdriver and a 17mm wrench and also a 10mm wrench. That's about it. I'm going to pull the back panel off. We're going to take the rotor off. That's the big thing here that turns. Before, though, we'll take out a few Phillips head screws on this wiring harness. These are the wires that come up to the Hall sensor. So there's a few Phillips head screws that you got to remove. And then we're going to take off this big round silver thing called the rotor using a 17mm wrench. So put the 17mm wrench on. And if you have like a little hammer, you're just using vice grips, you smack down, going lefty-loosey to help get it started. And once you give it a couple smacks, you should be able to spin it off by hand. It's a pretty big bolt, 17mm. And sometimes this thing, this big round thing, the stator, the splines, the plastic splines get stripped and you have to just put a new stator on. A new rotor. But these splines look really good. They're not stripped. So that was not the cause. This one had a bad Hall sensor, but on this model, we have to replace the whole stator assembly, which is this thing here. We're going to use 10mm wrench to take off all of these 10mm bolts. And once the bolts are off, we can just pull the stator assembly right off. This is what you call a direct drive motor. These are really cool. They have very few moving parts, no belt. But the Hall sensors don't last for a very long time, maybe about 4 or 5 years, and you have to replace them. So we've got all those bolts out, and then we're going to just carefully pull the stator assembly off. We're going to disconnect 2 modular connectors. One's bringing power to the motor, and the other one's on this part, the Hall sensor. It comes right off. This is the power connections. You've got to pinch in pretty hard and wiggle. It should come off. So there's the old one. We've got a brand new one, cost about $160. Get it in position. When we get the connectors on first, this is the one for power. Here's the one for the Hall sensor. Hall sensor just helps the computer understand what the motor's doing, what direction it's spinning, and how fast it's spinning. And if the computer doesn't get that signal, it'll give you the LE error, and also it won't behave properly. It'll spin in a weird way, like just partial spin or no spin. So they call it a locked rotor because the rotor just doesn't want to move. Sometimes it's stuck because the splines are so messed up, and sometimes it's just the computer can't really talk to it because the Hall sensor is defective. It has a diode that wears out. So we're tightening up these 10mm bolts. We're going to get them pretty tight to hold on the stator assembly. And we've already got our electrical connections done. So now we can put the little Phillips head screws in that are holding the wire harness in place. We don't want these wires to be floating around because they're real close to that rotor that's spinning so fast. So these wires have to be pushed against the plastic tub. This little bracket is the main thing that's holding those wires in. So when you get the LE error, the cheapest thing you can do is to replace that little Hall sensor. If you have a model, you can just get the sensor by itself. The other thing you could do is remove the rotor and just see if those plastic splines look like they're worn out, because then you need a new rotor. And the more expensive is on this model, where you replace the Hall sensor, but it has to come with the new stator assembly. Okay, we're just going to slip the rotor back on the splines, got to wiggle it on, push it to where it gets in as far as it'll go. And then you're going to add that 17 millimeter bolt back on. Sometimes you can put some Loctite on those threads too, just to make sure they won't come off. I think though, if you get it on there tight and give it a couple of whacks on with your wrench, whack your wrench with the hammer, you'll be tight enough where you'll be okay. So we set it for tighten, righty-tighty, and we're going to smack down. And that just allows it to break the inertia. If you try to do it by hand as you're tightening it, the whole rotor would spin. You'd never get it tight. So this just accelerates and gets it really tight. I'm just spinning it by hand now to make sure I don't hear any weird noises. Seems really smooth. Give it a couple more whacks, get it really tight. We're pretty much done. Now we just have to put the back panel back on. We slip it into these slots. And at the top, we're going to bend it a little bit to get it to go into the top slots. And then we're just going to add those 4 Phillips head screws back in to hold on the back panel. You'll probably get another 4 or 5 years out of your LG washing machine with this new Hall sensor. One thing you don't want to do with this machine is wash heavy things like blankets or bathroom mats, because it can wear out a thing in the back called the rear bearing, and that pretty much ruins the machine. Most other parts are pretty easy and cheap to replace. So now we're in the front of the machine, testing it out on the agitation, and it's doing great. So the computer is able to talk to the motor again. And we'll spray some Windex under these feet so I can move it, and I'm going to push the washer and dryer back in. This case, it goes basically into a closet. Then I'll put the door back on. So you can just do this with one person. The Windex acts kind of like a lubricant. I'm going to put the door back in and just push the pins back in. Kind of wiggle them in from the top. Get the bottom pin in. Push it in a little bit more and make sure the door can close. There we go. So I'm going to test it out on spin now. So on the LG washing machine, if you ever want to just go to spin, you can press the start button and then you can press the spin speed button. Here's the old assembly. You can press the spin speed button until it goes to high speed spin and then press start. And it'll run really fast, and it'll go for about 24 minutes. So there's that spin speed. And then once you get it right, just press start. You're all set. So we got full speed spin, looks really good. And that's all that motor really needed. So thanks so much for watching. And hopefully this will help you with your machine. Please subscribe when you get a chance. And we'll send you a lot more videos on how to fix your appliances at home. Thanks again.